Chapter 66 to 70. The thing didn't immediately rampage. I mean, it caused wanton destruction by merely existing, being bigger than most buildings, naturally emitting a poisonous miasma that looked very deadly, and just the sheer confusion at where it found itself. I could see the buildings begin to erode and the concrete literally disintegrate as the venom seeped into the surroundings. Frankly, I think someone summoned it in the sewers or something. Easily a premeditated action, no way someone could accidentally summoning this thing right at this moment. I unfurled my wings and took to the highest building I could get to within a few breaths to get a better idea of what was going on, because frankly, this whole thing was absurd. I saw in a few directions, there were more pockets of chaos, buildings on fire, and magical attacks soaring through the air as several groups clashed. My attention was turned back to the large dragon hydra thing that was starting to get rather ornery. I just sighed as I saw some heroes try to attack it, throwing what I considered to be cantrips at the thing. I spun my hat on my finger, watching the scene unfold with accumulating annoyance. What do you think, Drake? I met Yamada no Orochi on a few occasions. This thing's definitely pumping out poison reminiscent of it, though it's a very pale comparison. Probably some kind of magical snake creature yokai that was experimented on. Perhaps force-fed some remains of the serpent dragon. I wouldn't be surprised if it was originally a very, very distant relative, and they pushed some of that inside it to begin with. Drake agreed. Look at its heads and tails, they should be even, yet it has only 5 heads to its 6 tails, that is heavily mutated, and not in a good way. Now that I take a closer look, some of its scales are dislocated and jutting out at weird angles, and there are some odd growths on parts of its body that look like bones. As much as I hate that stupid snake, this thing just makes me angry. Even if left alone, it would probably die by itself in a few weeks. Just as Drake finished, one of the mouths opened up, and a condenses stream of green fire spewed out down the street. The surroundings didn't catch fire and burn, they dissolved. Is that poison? Yeah. Maybe it has some Hydra ancestry as well. Drake pondered and I could only nod my head. Some unholy combination, that isn't really unholy if I think about it. I mean, the serpent dragon was poisonous, but the Hydra, it was known for its poison, even to an extent that gods feared it. Maybe whatever happened to this thing, it merely latched onto Orochi's poison concept and that's how it mutated the way it did? Just as Drake said, this thing was breaking down and wouldn't last long by itself. I would put money that its own poison was eating away at it on the inside. Your guess is as good as mine, even as is, it couldn't compare in any way to that stupid snake. Yeah, Dryad didn't really get along with other dragons. I shook my head, I wasted enough time. I focused on my heart, allowing my magical energy to explode out. It only took a moment for all 5 heads of that things to dart towards my directions, eyes staring at me menacingly. Having an artificial dragon heart does have its boons outside of the physical enhancements. This snake dragon yokai abomination ignored the little insects that were trying to bite it as it started moving towards me. I suppose I was acting as a challenge, even if neither of us was a real dragon, certain instincts were still ingrained. Even I could feel an annoyance at its presence, as minuscule as that creeping sensation was. Well, one thing was for sure, whatever origin this thing claimed, it was a strictly malevolent being. May as well flex my Onmyoji since I'm in the neighborhood. That and apparently Odin was around, don't want to use too many runic spells for the moment. This has already been a shit show, don't need to drag him into it. Flicking my hand, several talismans overlapped between my fingers. God of the East Sea, Ame. God of the West Sea, Shikuryu. God of the South Sea, Kyoju. God of the North Sea, Gukyu. Gods of the 7 seas, fend off 100 demons and drive back the fierce disaster. Order. My voice carried from top the building, my magical energy fluctuated out as a massive pentagram formed both in the sky and on the ground under the malevolent snake creature. They both lit up and the miasma seeping from its pores began to vanish, the venomous liquid that spewed from its mouths onto the surroundings were doused and dissipated. Even the creature itself looked up to the sky and shrieked in pain and anger. This was to stop its corrupted presence from spoiling the area. Damage can be rebuilt, but it's infinitely harder to cleanse an area after something like this lingers here for too long. I admired my work briefly, it seems my practicing has indeed paid off in spades. While not my main focus when I was training, I definitely spent many hours I toiled away to learn this craft, especially when Scathack read up on it and realized how much I was ignoring it. I held back a shudder. With a small smile, I jumped down from high up and squared up against the beast. It seemed content to entirely focus on my movements, not rampaging about. Of course, it roared with all 5 heads, anger clear on its many faces. Noisy. I dismissed him. It was intelligent enough to understand I wasn't intimidated, but it would be difficult to test how sapient it actually is. I shook my head. Dawnbreaker flew out at lightning speed, its golden light shining bright as it decapitated one of the heads in that brief moment where it was not on its guard. It hissed in pain, roared in fury, and stared at me with madness. I only raised an eyebrow when the fallen head physically dissolved into a toxic puddle and a new head grew in its pace at a visible pace. Did it trade physical ability for enhanced regeneration? I didn't expect my sword to cut off that head with such ease. It was by no means instantaneous like the dragon serpent would be, but that regeneration was top-notch for nearly anything else in the world. Its mouths opened up and the miasmic fires sprayed at me. As they approached, I continued my pace unperturbed. The space around me shattered, like glass, and I was a few feet out of the way, still continuing at an even pace, each step unabated. The head swept, melting the surroundings, and I would always appear in safe spot, much to the creature's annoyance. It may look like a cute little trick, but it was actually an advanced technique utilizing the kaleidoscope. I was essentially pulling myself to another dimension and allowing the world's natural flow to force me back into the correct path, but the time it took to do that allowed me to essentially sidestep attacks. Eventually, it got close enough to just try and pounce at me with one of its heads. Probably a smarter option, but still useless. Ascalon. I called gently. The anti-dragon sword flew out of my ring, taking the head off at the base of the neck, except this time, there was no regeneration. The head flopped to the ground, lifeless. Impressive to actually see it in action. Drake commented. The anti-dragon concepts really do devour anything remotely draconic. Perhaps, it is even worse for this lesser dragon because it can't defend against such a thing even if it is slightly less effective in the end. I held out my hand, and Ascalon flew to me, fingers clutched around its grip. My knees bent and the air behind me exploded at my abrupt increase in speed. My arms moved with a speed that had taken this creature by surprise. I rained down slashes on its body before it could reach. Several more heads dropped the ground around me and the whole creature finally fell over. Its tainted blood seeping out and creating an entirely toxic environment. Even my spell was having trouble containing this malevolent venom. Well, not much I can do about that, still better than letting it roam free. I sighed, kicking the corpse to make sure it was truly dead, but I doubt I would miss something like that again. Call it a small bit of self-consciousness after that whole dragon fiasco. Feel better? Meh. I replied, I just wasn't really into it. I mean I had fun, I always like to test various magical things, but it wasn't a challenge. Maybe? I thought over his words for a moment. Do I desire a real fight? Or maybe I'm still just moping, honestly it could be both as well. I don't know, I'm still just so, blah. I looked up around me and noticed people peeking out from hiding places. Magical barriers coming down, and heads poked out of windows. But what I noticed immediately were the phones taking pictures and being held up like they were recording. Ah, I forgot that was a thing here. DevilNet or something, basically the supernatural version of the internet and various social medias. Yeah, Devil basically corner the market on such things, and most other species are content to just use their products. Well, fuck. Damn, should have used the boosted gear. Yeah, fuck that. So, what are the chances that no one got a good look at my face? Drake just laughed. Oh, this one is good too. I let out a chuckle, bitch please. A caption with a picture of me backhanding some random mook who tried to sneak attack me. The comments were great too. Oh god, I've missed the internet. I stayed around a little longer after killing the Hydra Dragon Snake thing. I was already pretty much revealed at that point, so I put out some fires, both metaphorically and literally. Afterwards, it wasn't particularly hard to get my hands on a magic phone, or well, several of them. A few of which were currently in pieces in front of me as I was seeing how they worked. Interesting pieces of magic. The shell was kind of fake, only made to look mundane and technological. The magical mechanisms were quite well done though. I had to tip my hat to whoever created these things, they were a sturdy and well thought out piece of magic. I of course took several to pass on to Rin for her own studies, they would go a long ways in helping her project. But what got my attention, was the attention I had gotten. Frankly, from what I could piece together, what happened was a complete shit show. Even only several hours afterwards, things were still hitting the fan. Oh, the age of information, how it permeates even the supernatural communities. many leaks and secrets revealed straight onto the devil net. So, my assumption was right. Some idiots operating under the cult of Tamamonome started causing chaos to draw attention away from a ritual site a few miles away from where I was at. Don't know the specifics of that, it's really hush-hush. Word on the street is that they were responsible for the big beastie I fought. Apparently, they brought in a few human clans who were on the zealous side with regards to their stance on coexistence. That is to say, the only good yokai is a dead yokai, ironic considering who they worked with. 50-50 chance each side was going to betray the other after everything was done. Well, some of the more liberal clans saw what was going on, stepped in, only to be mistaken for the zealots. There are reports of a third unknown entity that also joined the fray, what appeared to be mostly humans wielding some interesting weapons. There were sightings of them infiltrating a few guarded locations and sneaking away in the chaos. What an eventful evening, and that wasn't even the end of it. Almost on K, an explosion erupted a little way away, and the massive form of a nine-tailed fox stepping on some very deserving people. Some idiots thought it was a good opportunity to stage a coup. Yup. I was on a forum basically getting the play-by-play. No way was I getting my feet wet in that whole mess. I did enough to ease my conscience as it was, but it made for some interesting entertainment. Now, with all of this going on, it may be a wonder how I somehow drew attention. Apparently there was a nice picture of me with my wings out, and someone asked the simple question, is that Lucifer? Regardless of my thoughts on him, I couldn't deny the resemblance. The immediate assumption was that another side suddenly joined in, the devils, but that was quickly disproven by no other devils appearing and me actually helping people. But, no, it just kinda spiraled out from there. My favorite theory someone put up is that I'm the time-traveling younger Lucifer. Oh, internet, never change. Species, magic, mundane, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Unfortunately, cooler heads prevailed in the discussions, and it started to trend on various media sites. Not too surprising when one of the strongest beings in the world suddenly has a hitherto new relative. Truthfully, I still didn't know how to feel about my father. Hate. Did I hate him? That is a distinct possibility. I didn't exactly blame him for mother's death, it's not like they were close in any capacity. I doubt he even knew I existed for my early life. Hell, my mother didn't even know who he was. I wasn't ashamed to admit that my mother was a prostitute, rather, an escort. She did everything she could to give me a life, to provide for me. I am proud to have had her as my mother. Even still, I don't know if I could even spare enough to truly despise him. Was it lesser than that? A more mild dislike, perhaps even apathy. I did not care for him, I disliked him, he was irrelevant to me. And most of that stemmed from how I was being forced into a certain little box for my life. Was I still angry about that? Oh, most definitely, but I have calmed down from those years ago. It's not like I'm going to jump down to hell and start a killing spree in some insane vengeance-induced rage. Am I allowed to just want to move on with my life and not dwell on it anymore? I sighed, cleaning up my mess and gathering everything I had. I guess I shouldn't put this off any longer. I muttered, opening a portal to a destination I was both dreading and aching for. It was a small walk away. I didn't want to pop right in, for some reason I felt it would be impolite, especially since I haven't seen her in a very long time. Hey, Mom. I said quietly, stopping in front of a certain grave marked as Mieko Shimoda. It was a fair distance away from Kuo, so I rarely had an opportunity to visit. I was feeling things I thought I had gotten over many years ago, yet it seems like they reopened the moment I'm here. There were some weeds overgrown here and there. I got on my knees and started tidying up, placing some fresh flowers along with a few sticks of incense to properly pay my respects. It's been a while. I finally spoke, sitting on my butt. A lot has changed, I don't even know where to begin. I sighed, my eyes drifting up to the sky. I have a new name now. I squeezed out. New name for a new person, or something like that. I don't know, it seems like my reasoning back then was mostly out of spite and anger. I didn't want any connection to my old self, I felt so powerless back then. I don't really regret what happened, more so the reason for why I did it. I couldn't help but run a hand through my hair. Your son is strong now. I paused, twiddling my fingers. I'm also a magician. I let out a laugh. I think I said I wanted to be that when I was younger after we saw that magic show. Well, I suppose dreams do come true, even if it turned out a bit differently. I smiled faintly at that old memory. I also made a small promise to myself to learn stage magic. I also have a girl in my life, rather 3. I felt oddly bashful at saying that in front of my mother's grave. I wonder if you would be annoyed at me for that, but I care for all of them. I'm sure they would love you, they're all wonderful girls. The first one I met was Meridia. She's not human, but she is really sweet. I smiled as I reminisced about my first meeting with her. She's strong too, could basically tell the world to F dash. I caught myself. Sorry, tell the world to sod off. I corrected. Then there's Artoria. I'm sure you would absolutely get a kick out of meeting her. Yes, I had my night phase as a kid as well. We started to date more seriously recently, well, kinda just accept our relationship as something more than a one-off, I guess. I glanced back down at my mother's grave. Don't worry, I'm not keeping any major secrets from any of them, nor do I plan to. Lastly though, I stopped myself. It's hard to talk about her right now. It still hurts, Mom. I know it's not a final goodbye, but I miss her so much. I wiped away a little wetness in my eyes. Excuse my language, but I'm going to kick her ass the next time I see her. If I keep talking about them, I don't think I'll ever stop. I felt a small sense of genuine contentment at this moment. Why don't I tell you about some of my adventures instead? How about that time I fought a dragon with my friend Thorum? I took one last look at my mother's grave. I felt relief. I didn't realize how much I needed to get some things off my chest. It honestly felt like a weight was lifted from my shoulders. Scat-Hack was still a sore spot. I still almost wept when I thought about her, but I felt okay at this moment. I was content for the moment, and I felt like I could properly mourn without becoming a complete wreck. Even being gone for over a decade, Mom still knows how to make me feel better. Well, regardless, I could really use a drink right about now. My whole purpose for coming back here was to find some kind of closure, for my own mental health. I would just enjoy my time while it lasted, no responsibilities, just have some fun and finish some projects that didn't need my immediate attention before. I stepped through a portal back over to Kyoto, close by where I left before. It was an area that was relatively untouched, so some places were still open for business. I recalled seeing a pub around here somewhere, or rather an izakaya. I wouldn't mind some comfort food as well. Been a while since I've had proper Japanese cuisine, even if it is the bar variety. My mind wandered as I just enjoyed my stroll. I was pretty much set on buying that property I took a few looks at. The house didn't really matter much, but the land was prime real estate for my need. And I wanted to get testing on this. I was quite interested on how this would turn out. To anchor a single location and spread it across several world lines and make it stable enough to support several different time flows. It will be fun, and I couldn't help but smile at the thought. Perhaps I should do a smaller test once I work the kinks out, maybe buy some land over in America, see if I can't do this small connection first. My muse brought me to the little bar I saw before. I saw the lights still on, so I happily walked inside, though I felt something both strange and familiar as I got close. It almost felt like I was in the land of shadows again, except it wasn't nearly as oppressive. I just shook my head. This was a supernatural place. Many species and people lived here. It wouldn't be good to judge someone based on what they are, or where they come from. Though when I entered, I only saw a single person sitting at the counter, and only the bartender off to the side. A woman with grayish-silver hair. She turned her head to look at me, red eyes almost seemingly capable of penetrating my soul. I raised an eyebrow, keeping my power bubbling under the surface. Wilhelm. I know. Strong. This woman was extremely strong, but she was keeping it extremely contained. Like only the absolute barest of her presence was leaking out, and even then I couldn't tell what she was. She didn't seem hostile, so I ignored it, and she was content to enjoy her own drink. The man behind the counter eyed me warily, and I noticed he was kind of keeping his distance from the woman, as much as he could without being rude. Odd. Start me off with some yakitori and a beer. He didn't even answer me before getting started. What a strange atmosphere, and I couldn't quite help myself. I glanced over to the woman drinking by herself a few seats down. Hello, I'm Wilhelm. I introduced myself. I noticed the man freeze briefly behind the counter. The woman turned to me a little surprised at my words. She stared for a moment before answering. Izzy. She said plainly. Huh, strange name for a Japanese woman, but who am I to judge? Who knows what her actual ancestry is like? I try not to judge based on appearances. Well, I wouldn't mind some conversation while I drink. Interlude 2. POV Okita Suji, Knight of Lucifer. Walking out of the room where I gave my report, I noticed a rather familiar face approaching me. I could already feel a headache coming on, no doubt she was here to speak to my king. Lady Gremory. I greeted the mother of my king, and lady of House Gremory. Okita, a pleasure as always. His neutral expression was something of familiarity at this point. Tell me, has my stupid son done something productive recently? I held back a wince at her words. If it were anyone else, maybe I would have some words to say about them insulting my king. I of course had many things to say about him myself, but I was loyal to a fault and I would never betray his trust, not after he saved me all those years ago. I am unsure of what you are referring to, Lady Gremory. As loath as I was to learn how to navigate through the devil's political spectrum, I can't help but admit it has done me a world of good. Unfortunately, such things seem to fail against Lady Gremory. I may as well be unequipped in a duel of words with this woman. She just stared at me, expression never changing. Has my wayward grandson been found yet? I believe young Lord Milikas is with his mother, Lady Grafia at the moment, Lady Gremory. I replied without any hesitation. Do I look like a fool to you, Okita Suji? She asked me. No, Lady Gremory. No, so then, who were you trying to fool with such nonsense? Since there are only the two of us here, and I am no fool, then it must be you? As you say, Lady Gremory. I'm sorry my lord, your mother is scary. She hummed to herself, eyes never leaving mine. I could have sworn you were in Japan for unrelated reasons, correct? Of course. I affirmed her words. So why have you come back so suddenly? I'm afraid I'm not allowed to speak of such matters, my lady. Yes, regardless of the familial connections between Lord Lucifer and Lady Gremory, she wasn't allowed to push such matters, lest bounds be overstepped. The same reason my lord couldn't simply annul his sister's engagement, otherwise the political fallout may result in rebellion. Sorry my lord, I'm using you as a shield. I see, then it has nothing to do with the situation in Kyoto right now? She asked. I paused ever so briefly, and I realized that she caught me there. It appears the situation there has become known. I could only sigh. Please. She rolled her eyes. You really need to get with the times, Okita. That whole mess was already posted online hours ago. I was aware of what was going on before you even came back. Ah yes, this DevilNet thing. I never cared for it if I were to be honest. The only reason I even started on those social medias was because Lady Leviathan was adamant about friending me or some other nonsense. I was there when the chaos started, and I of course lent a hand, to better mend bridges and such. Seraphal was overjoyed that I received much goodwill in that small time frame by assisting Lady Yasaka. I believe this was the first time that Lady Yasaka willingly corresponded with Seraphal in decades. Even still, they were keen to kick me out, albeit more politely than that. They had much house cleaning to do and it wouldn't do any good for an outsider to be there while it happened. I certainly could not fault them for that. Besides, I was needed to come back and give my report. Even though our relations are very strained, we are still considered allies with the Yukai. Granted, they are unlikely to lend us any meaningful help unless the more dire of emergencies occurs, and even that is iffy. Well, a shame. I was looking forward to meeting my grandson, he is such a cutie. She actually smiled for the first time. And the way he fought that snake, so dashing. She practically cooed. I blinked for a moment, registering the words. What? She tilted her head ever so slightly. You don't know. She withdrew her phone, pressed a few buttons and flipped it around to show me a video. I stared at it in shock as the target of my search was right there fighting against some Hydra monster in the middle of Kyoto, where I had just been mere hours ago. A small smile rose on her face. It appears as though my idiot son's little indiscretion has become common knowledge. I was utterly speechless, yet she continued to prod me. I'm curious how he got so strong so quickly. If Rias and Sona are to be believed, he was either able to hide his power so expertly that they couldn't detect anything, or he was truly powerless back then. She mused. What do you think, Okita, how did he get so strong right under your noses? I steeled my expression. I guess the blood of my lore. Lady Gremory snorted, cutting me off. Yeah, his blood. She deadpanned. I'm sure that's it, as you can see his blatant use of our power of destruction. The sarcasm dripping from her words. That stupid son of mine. She scowled. This would have never happened had he just let me raise the boy instead of putting him off to Satan's nowhere for years. I couldn't possibly comment. Which was a lie, and we both knew that. I was aware of the boy for many years, finding out after his mother had passed. I had offered to take him in and teach him to defend himself, but my lord refused. He seemed more intent to simply wash his hands of the entire situation with doing the bare minimum to secure the boy's continued existence. Yes, I'm sure. She drawled. Would he even want to come meet me at this point? Or did my idiot son poison my cute little grandson already? I'm sure we can convince him to return home. I said earnestly. Home? She raised an eyebrow. I doubt he considers anywhere near us to be his home. She let out an uncharacteristic sigh. I know that father is going to make a big deal out of this as well. Another one of our bloodline without the power of destruction. We'll only be so lucky if that's all that happens. While I stay away from politics as much as possible, I am unfortunately forced to keep abreast of the many things that go on in the upper class of the Devil Society. No doubt my lord will come under fire regarding his bastard son. Thankfully, Grafia is at least showing solidarity in public, even if they are still fighting behind closed doors. I need to find Beowulf and ask him to come make himself visible to help keep off the pressure. Unfortunately, I don't know where he is at the moment. He put in his vacation request a week ago and disappeared somewhere in Scandinavia. The only words back was he checked around for the boy in his free time. Searcher could help as well. He is quite the hit with children these days. I believe I heard his action figures are a top seller among children under 12. Well, maybe I should seduce him then. I almost choked as the words entered my ears and I stared at Lady Gremory, my thoughts completely shattered. Lady Gremory. You think he likes MILFs? She smirked, pushing her large chest up. I heard that's what the young ones are saying these days. Oh, she's just doing this to get a reaction out of me, hopefully. POV Sona Citri. Bucho, I'm done. I watched as Issei Hayadu burst through the door. He paused staring at me sitting next to Rias. Oh, Kaicho, you're here too. Indeed. I said evenly, even if I was annoyed at his actions. It seems that turning into a devil did nothing to diminish his inability to read a room. Rias just sighed. It basically the default reaction she had whenever she paid attention to Issei. I couldn't help but feel sorry for her, finding out that Issei didn't have a sacred gear at all. No, he just seemed to have some draconic bloodline that seemed to suddenly manifest. Honestly, it was an easy mistake to make. Rias's rook, Chiron, was their only means of sensing sacred gears, and that was mainly due to her very attentive nose and very conservative use of senjutsu. It was almost safe to assume that if a normal kid started smelling like a dragon, he likely had a dragon-based sacred gear, which there are a lot of. Unfortunately for everyone involved, Issei was barely better than a standard human, only requiring a normal pawn to reincarnate. His dragon bloodline did mean he had some decent potential to tap into, eventually, but that was slow going. His stamina, for instance, it was several times better than even Rias's knight. Too bad his other aspects aren't on the same level. But small mercies, that means he can train many times harder as well. We're having a meeting, Issei, sit down. Rias commanded her pawn, though with less force than I would have. Yes, Buncho. Issei said happily, taking a seat near his king. How did he get so strong so quickly? Rias bit her thumb, staring at the video being played. Oh Shimoda, what have you gotten yourself into? Was it possible he was this strong before? I asked. I mean, it's possible, if he was that strong, then wouldn't be able to hide his power from us, or something. Rias was grasping at straws and even I was confused by what I was witnessing. Who is that? And what's he fighting? Is that a Yukai? Issei started spitting out every question that entered his head. That's my nephew. Rias said quietly. Awesome, Bucho's nephew is so strong. You can handle that thing too, right? Issei spoke without filter, but his questions weren't exactly inappropriate either. He was still new to all of this. I think anyone would excuse such questions here. Well, no. I answered for her. Sona. Rias whined at my blunt dismissal. I could easily handle that thing. She huffed. Rias, you can kill it, that doesn't mean you can beat it. You lack almost any kind of defensive ability, and your spell repertoire consists of throwing your destruction at any enemy. Rias needed a wake-up call sometimes. I'll admit, she is a genius, but she relies way too heavily on her bloodline and thinks nothing else matters. Could you kill it before it spewed any of that venom from its mouths? A single hit of that and you're done. Rias favored overwhelming destruction above all else, forging even basic defensive means. If I had to guess, it's because her bother can get away with such a thing, yet she is nowhere near his level and it would hurt her pride to admit that to herself. Rias crossed her arms in annoyance. And I'm sure you can beat it. Yes. I replied without hesitation. I have more than just pure power, my ice will be able to immobilize it while I could implement a guerrilla-style attacks. Though I didn't admit that I would probably take everything I had to beat such a creature, and even then, it wasn't 100% guarantee. Who knows how much resistance to magic it has. And Shimoda was able to slay it with an ease like he was going for a walk. It was a hit to my pride. I watched almost all the material I could get my hands on regarding Shimoda's little debut in Kyoto. Some powerful looking swords that flew around him, taking down enemies that I would need conscious effort to deal with. Magic that I couldn't understand as space around him shattered at his whims, and the large-scale Eastern magics he employed with relative ease. How? The way he moved, the way he acted, so calm, like it was merely another day, not literal chaos and pandemonium erupting around him, not a giant snake dragon yokai thing bearing down on him with the intent to kill. I could only clench my hands in frustration as Rias and I tried to analyze everything we saw, trying to dig out the secrets of Shimoda's newfound strength. Suddenly, I questioned my ability to get even with him for blowing me up. I happily dug into the many dishes presented before me. How I really missed my homeland's cuisine, even if I enjoy variety about half the time. Of course the sake was probably making it even better. I need to remember to grab a few bottles and bring them back to Sasaki. And I suppose the company didn't hurt. Oh, here is an amusing one. My companion had moved closer after we started talking. Do you think he wants a sugar mama? She read over her phone, some random comments about my adventures earlier. I snorted, holding in the drink I took. Well, did she include a picture? Oh yes. She flipped it around revealing a very large woman in some very skimpy clothing. Should I reply on your behalf? An opportunity like this does not come every day, one must seize chances like this. I could have sworn I killed that snake monster earlier today. I squinted my eyes at the picture before taking a look at Izzy as we both shared a laugh. I can see where you are confused. She nodded with a small smile on her face. Perhaps we should ask for more pictures. I'm sure she has some more, flattering shots. Somewhere. Frankly, how this all started was kind of a blur, I was pretty far into my drinks at this point. I think we somehow started talking about what happened earlier in the city, then she recognized me and we somehow got to where we are now. Sure, as long as you filter everything before I see it. I offered. Oh no, I seem to have closed the page, I guess we'll never know now. She said rather smoothly. Alas, your dreams of waking up every night in her arms are now dashed. How convenient. I rolled my eyes. Quite. She held a small smile. I'm curious what someone of your origin is doing here while this whole mess happened. My heritage wasn't exactly a secret anymore. Well, that's a polite way of asking me why I was here, I guess. Just got back to Japan after being away for a while. Thought I would pay respects to my mother and wanted to buy some things while I was up and about. I explained, not really feeling the need to hide anything. She didn't sound like she was accusing me of anything, so I humored it. And I believe my actions spoke much louder than my words. Probably the fact that any authorities haven't been blatant about searching for me, even with all the crap going on for them. A dutiful son then. She nodded in acceptance. My children could learn a thing or two, she frowned. Children trouble? I asked, she seemed like she wanted to just vent, and she listened to my ramblings for a while. She let out a sigh, downing the remainder of her drink. I have not seen my children in years. She shook her head, finishing off a glass of her own. Just because we live long lives doesn't mean I don't miss them. Have you tried reaching out on your end? I offered. She pursed her lips, staring at the ceiling. It would be unwise for me to pop in on them. She seemed rather melancholic. They have rather high positions, and I don't want to cause them any more issues like I have in the past. Whether they would be happy to see me, I don't know, but I know for a fact that their subordinates and allies would be very much on edge with my appearance. Simply call them then. I don't think they even use such things, they are a bit old-fashioned. She admitted. I only learned because I've been. She cut herself off and sighed. Ah, not too surprising, considering she wasn't human herself, though I had no idea what she was. A letter then, it doesn't even have to be anything important. Just say you miss them and haven't heard from them in a while. She tilted her head at me. And you think that will work? She said quietly. I was not the best mother in the past. Then start off small, ask them how they've been doing, maybe they just need someone to vent to or want to talk about some small stuff. I shrugged. You'll never know if you don't at least make an effort. I pointed out. Besides, what is the worst that could happen? They continue to not speak with you. I see, I suppose you are correct. Her expression turned a little bit brighter, maybe even excited. I think, I will get started on that right away. I was happy she looked a little better now. She kept me occupied from my own issues, so I'm glad I could return the favor. Well, it was fun. I smiled. It's always nice to find someone to drink with. I raised my last glass up and finished it off. Oh, of course. Yes, it was a pleasurable night. She returned the small smile. Rarely do I find someone to speak to these days. She paused briefly, looking slightly unsure. Would you like to exchange numbers? I find myself wishing for company sometimes. She seemed rather hesitant. That would be lovely. I genuinely replied, withdrawing a piece of paper and writing my new number on it. She grabbed it and looked rather happy. I couldn't help but smile at her sincerity. Huh, I guess I made a new friend, not like I have many of those. Today was turning out to be not so bad, maybe I would go as far as to call it a good day. I woke up and it was practically noon already. I groggily stood up, rubbing my head. It was throbbing slightly. I didn't have the biggest hangover, but it was definitely there. I'm in, the house I was going to buy, did buy. I think I went over to that place and purchased it last night. Yeah, that sounds about right. I shook my head and rubbed my eyes. Drake, this is my house, right? Yeah, you bought it yesterday. Good, good. I nodded to myself. Would have been awkward otherwise. Also, thankfully I had some furniture stored. I stared at the couch I just woke up on that was in the idly of an empty room. I blinked, looking at my phone, using it as a mirror as best as I could. Hey Drake, did I get angry at the clerk at that store last night? What do you mean? Did I attack him, or was that a dream? No, you got annoyed at him for mentioning your father and making you an esteemed client or some other nonsense, but you didn't do anything else. Oh, okay. I let out a breath. I'm glad I'm not someone who does stuff like that. Thanks Drake. I stretched my arms, having slept on them weirdly. No problem, it's fun to watch regardless. I did drink a lot last night, more than I intended. I rarely ever get drunk, especially around people I didn't know too well. Hey Drake, do you know who Izzy is? I questioned my companion. I have a few guesses, but it doesn't really matter. She didn't seem at all hostile. I guess you're right. I smiled slightly. Well, no need to be suspicious, it was merely chance we met and sorta became friends. If it's something important, I'm sure she'll tell me if we get closer. It was always nice to have more friends. Now, if I remember correctly. I sent my gaze into my ring, looking for a very specific item. Aha, I quickly grabbed a thermos out and uncapped it, steam filling the air. Glad I kept this with me. I muttered, pouring myself some coffee I kept. Well then, what's on the agenda today? I casually sipped my hot beverage, peeking out the window and admiring the view. I had a fair little property right here in the city. The house was a more Western style, 2 stories and a half-dozen bedrooms. I guess you could even call it a mansion by some standards, cost quite a bit too. Housing prices here are ridiculous. You know, this is an odd feeling, Drake. What? Not having anything to do, no pressing matters to take care of. I looked up at the false sky, the fake clouds and sun that fall and rise like the outside. Even when I was in Skyrim, there were always something I was working towards. In the land of shadows, I never felt like I stopped training, even when I was relaxing. Here, right at this moment, I have nothing I have to do. This is what you wanted, right? Yeah. I admitted. I'm not complaining, I suppose I'm just realizing how much I've been working since my memories appeared. Honestly, I feel off, almost guilty that I'm not doing something. I let out a small chuckle. Well, what do you want to do? I haven't asked myself that question in a while. I smiled again, taking another sip. I think, I want to play around with the house, set up some bounded fields, and maybe get started on the phasing I've been thinking about. The phasing, I didn't know what to call it right now, but it wasn't a bad name. To have my house existing at multiple spots in different worlds. Finishing off my drink, I walked outside getting a better look at the property line. I summoned Gibalg into my hand, giving it a twirl as I held it over my shoulder and walked a corner by a tree. I held the shaft of the spear up to my eye, using it as a reference point and measure some distance. I think I have an idea. I muttered, stabbing the spear into the ground, then counting my paces as I walked to the other end of the property. I held my hands up, closing one eye, trying to picture certain things in my head. I took out Mirage and stabbed it into the ground right where I was, then went to another corner and did the same thing again with Dawnbreaker, then the last corner with Ascalon. Walking to my porch, I sat down on my steps and took out my notebook and a pen as I began some preliminary calculations. A square then? I muttered, drawing a quick sketch of the area with 4 points plotted. I tapped my pen against my chin. No, the power would be too unevenly distributed. There needs to be a centralized location while the 4 areas act as anchors. Curious, the Kaleidoscope doesn't like to be spread out. The dimensional energies tend to dissipate rather quickly if they aren't being forced into very specific places with a firm hand, so using the basis of square to create this matrix of bounded fields will be undesirable. Oh. I suddenly had inspiration. Equilateral triangles. I snapped my fingers. 4 points that make a square, but we add a 5th right at the center. Then using that we make 4 triangles, using the 4 outer points as the bases. I began scribbling some more notes and calculations. Now we have 4 triangles, but there is a more direct link if they're all powered by the centralized point instead of being spread out in a large square. I looked around the yard, fences on either side, and nodded to myself. This place already has a concept of boundaries, and I can hijack that to reinforce my own bounded fields to better stabilize the anchor points. What do you think, Drake? You're asking me. You know, I don't really know how magic works, especially something as complicated as what you're doing. Give yourself some credit, you seem to follow my trains of thought usually. He grumbled for a moment before speaking, so we have 4 points, A, B, C, D, that correspond to where your weapons are. If I'm understanding this correctly, instead of just connecting them all in a square to create this bounded field, you are opting to instead create 4 triangles by adding a 5th spot at the center, E. So we would have something like EAB linked together, the same with the other points. While the final shape will still be a square, it is actually comprised of triangles. That's correct so far. I nodded at his words. So if I'm understanding correctly, that would mean the overall power of the bounded field would rise at least another level because the magical energy would bounce around 2 less points before running back to the source before once again being pushed out. The current would be firmer, and the waste would be overall much less. Not to mention, it would take overall less magical energy to achieve similar results than if you went with just a square. I couldn't help but smile. Nailed it all. I just needed to get started on the major calculations. Really, the main hurdle would be the huge supply of magical energy required, which isn't a problem to someone like me. Well, there is one issue. I paused briefly, a small grimace on my face. Yeah. What will you use to sustain and power such a strong bounded field? I sighed thinking about it. Mirage could do it, easily. As could my Staff of Magnus, but I didn't want to separate from either of those for long periods of time again. Yeah, producing that much magical energy is easy, sustaining it is a whole different matter. Usually one can just anchor a bounded field to the world, and maybe absorb ambient mana or some other approach, but here, I'm playing with dimensions and my needs are much greater. Well, questions for later. I pushed those thoughts to the side for now. At the moment, I just need to figure out the theory and outline for everything, then I'll head to New York and test a couple of them out. In the interim, I can just use the staff as a temporary solution. As annoying as finding another powerful object would be, I couldn't help but smile. I was having fun figuring out this piece of magic, and I was excited to get it going. I, unfortunately, had to go back to that ridiculous store to purchase some materials. The way they treated me really grated on my nerves, and I couldn't actually get angry because they were nothing but polite. Realistically, I knew they couldn't possibly know my feelings, but my annoyance still simmered under the surface. It's not like I would take it out on people only doing their jobs, but it just made me not want to be there, and perhaps that shone through my expressions. Well, it wasn't entirely bad. I did find something interesting and got it on an impulse. I did make a promise to myself to learn stage magic. I figured it could be a little hobby of mine, but I seemed to put the cart before the horse. I shall name you, Sir Wigglesbottom Fluffytail Octavius Benedict III. I held a rabbit up to the sky as it scrunched its little nose cutely. Or just Sir Wiggles for short. Because it wiggled its little butt at me when I first saw it. Did I mention this thing was intelligent? Really? Fuck you, it's a good name. What happened to the other two? We don't speak of them. I sat Sir Wiggles down next to me and he was content to stay by my side. I asked him previously if he wanted to come with me. I promised to take care of all his needs and find him a worthy mate, so he seemed to accept. From what the salesperson told me, his mother was a jackrabbit, which was obvious by the small little antlers growing on his head. But apparently on his father's side, he is a very, very distant relation to Tepaztecatl. I can't believe you made him your familiar. I can't believe you even questioned something like that at this point. Touché. It's not like I need a familiar, and I can't help that I fell in love with the little guy the moment I saw him. Frankly, I'm a cat person, but that doesn't mean I don't appreciate other little animals. I took out a head of lettuce that I still had from Skyrim and peeled off a few pieces to place down in front of him. Alright, just don't go too far out, I'm setting up some magic stuff, I don't want you to get hurt or anything. I rubbed its little head with my finger. I think it nodded at me, and the link I had with him due to making him my familiar kind of gave the impression he understood. I just nodded and moved to the spots I marked yesterday. Surprisingly, it wasn't hard to turn something into a familiar. If it didn't have enough sapience, then it couldn't resist you at all. If it was intelligent enough, it simply had to agree and boom, new familiar. Hell, the magical formulas were known practically worldwide. You know what? I hope you make him the most powerful rabbit that ever lived. I paused. Draig, that is one of the greatest ideas you've ever had. I resolved to teach him magic in the future, after I learned how to pull him out of my hat. Is it considered cheating if I use actual magical to pull him out? Taking out a large steel pillar, I hefted it up and slammed it into the marked location, making sure it was nice and steady. Making sure it was all perfect, I did the same to the other 4 points around my house to set up the first boundary layer. I would start off by drawing runes on each pillar to reinforce several concepts around my home. Both to protect it from the outside and inside. Should I include a geas that forcibly latches onto anyone I invite inside? A contract that is accepted when an invitation is extended, and they agree to cross my threshold. Guest rights. It was a common notion across many civilizations, even if it usually goes by other names. A curious thought, I could probably force people to act within certain bounds if they are invited inside. On the flip side, I would also be bound by such limitations. But then again, I wouldn't exactly start a battle with anyone I willingly invited inside. Well, I should probably focus on external defenses, right? Hell, I don't even have any furniture yet. My thoughts were suddenly interrupted, as I felt space near me vibrate and bend in certain ways that indicated someone manipulating it. My head snapped to the side as I saw a young man pop over. The vibrations along the world were very hard to miss. There was no teleportation circle, no blatant magical phenomena as he appeared. He wore what looked like a school uniform with a cliché wizard's robe over it. Honestly, he appeared rather mundane, like if you told any random kid he was a wizard, that was how he would pretty much dress. Hello. He greeted me, with a surprisingly amount of openness. I raised an eyebrow. Greetings. I'm George Faust. He said simply. I blinked for a moment, searching my memories. Named after the historical one? Yup, I'm his descendant. He seemed rather happy to say that little tidbit. Well, I can't exactly fault him for having pride in his origin. I mean, I named myself Schweinorg, but even still, I don't go around calling myself Zelrich. I remembered some things about this kid, some kind of magical prodigy, and he had a sacred gear, one I couldn't quite recall off the top of my head. It's not like I have a perfect memory, and I had quite a few things shoved in my head from my awakening. What can I do for you, George? I stood up, giving him my full attention. Well. He paused for a moment. Sorry, I'm not really good at this, usually it's someone else doing this part. He scratched the back of his head. I kind of wanted to invite you to join the faction I'm in. He seemed unsure of himself, yet he still had a strange amount of confidence in the way he stood there. Pardon? I was a bit confused here. Well, I'm a part of the hero faction. We're basically descendants of heroes or reincarnations. Or just humans that want to protect humanity from the supernatural. He explained. Okay, some issues with that. I'm not a hero or whatever, and I'm only half human. Hero faction. I seem to recall them now, not something I gave much thought until this moment. Well, you're still half. He said with a smile. We care more about like-minded people. And from what I could find out, You aren't part of the devil faction and even suffered at their hands. Suffered? I repeated the word. What exactly do you know about me? I'm not really famous. Actually, he pushed up his glasses. You got rather popular recently. Your father is one of the strongest in the world. Do you think being his son isn't going to draw attention? We're not the only ones that were gathering information on you. Well, fuck. Who is spreading information on me? Hell, who could possibly even know where I'm? That fucking golden store is selling info on me. George chuckled. You didn't know. They literally sell anything. Information is a commodity. Bastards even had the gall to call me a esteemed customer to my face and do this behind my back. I scowled. And I think there is some misinformation there. Suffered at their hands? A bit edgy there, don't you think? I was neglected and controlled. I wasn't exactly tortured or beaten. As much as I dislike them, I'm not going to go around saying stupid nonsense like he's spouting. He seemed a bit surprised at my words. I couldn't help but laugh. Did you think all it would take is pushing some of my buttons and I would hop on your hero train for some revenge against my birth father? I looked at him incredulously. Kid, I'm well aware of my own issues that came with my upbringing, but that doesn't mean I'm frothing at the mouth to get even. He frowned, hearing my words. Well, that usually works for some people. He said awkwardly. Would you still consider it? There aren't many magicians in our faction, and I would love to have someone to talk magic with. He sighed. I'm tired of those other idiots too concerned with how hard they can punch. Okay, I sympathize with him slightly there. I'll pass, I'm busy with my own stuff right now. We have a lot of resources, magical grimoires, rare materials, girls. He looked a bit shy as he said that last part. Are you pimping out your faction members to me? Boys? I'm considering smacking you. Sorry, I have a habit of sticking my foot in my mouth when I get nervous. He admitted with an awkward smile and red cheeks. Yeah, definitely giving this a hard pass. I'm not going to touch that dumpster fire with a 100-foot pole. Well, no one can't say I didn't try. He slumped his shoulders. Sorry, but boss said he needs you for some future plans regardless. He regained his composure, and a strange mist began to swirl around his body. I would have rather you worked with us willingly, but that's not a necessity. Ho, are you going to fight me? I raised an eyebrow at him. I would rather just grab you and bring you back to the boss. He smiled. As the mist exploded out, the world around me changed, rewritten by this kid's ability. I realized now what I was dealing with, the information coming to the forefront of my mind. Dimension lost. I said evenly. Oh, you know it. I thought you hadn't been in the supernatural world that long. His voice echoed out around me, even if his form disappeared. But, that's one of the reasons we wanted you, I guess. The space around me had been changed from the normal flow of the world, a new dimension forcibly created overtop the existing one. It was like a bastardized version of a reality marble, except instead of projecting one's inner world, it's this false one. Granted, it's nowhere near the level of a true reality marble, merely the feeling I first got when it appeared. A small smile curled up on my lips. Playing with space in front of me, you're 1,000 years too early. I withdrew Mirage from my ring and pulled on the kaleidoscope. The multitude of colors burst out, the iridescent light cascaded in every direction, pushing against the barriers of this dimension that George had created. There were many, many ways I could have gone about breaking this space, but I chose the most straightforward one. What are you doing? I heard his panicked cries ring out from the surroundings as my magic began to usurp over his own dominion. I guess a Longinus only amounts to this much. I smirked as I reached out my hand, the colors scaled up the walls of this reality, consuming it entirely, and then I clenched my fingers. It shattered. Cracks rang out, reality shifted back to normal as everything was realigned. I was once again in the outside world, staring down at the now shaking kid. Why you, how? How did you break through my dimension lost? He looked at me fearfully. Yeah, these kids rely super heavily on their sacred gears, must be a real kick in the balls to see it no-sold like I just did. I ignored his question, and continued walking towards him. You know, I was content to end things where they were, but then you had to go and attack me. I shook my head. He almost fell to the ground as he turned around and began to run, several spell circles created in his wake with magical spells launching towards me. I frowned, my sword batting away most of them. Chow chow, George shouted, mist shooting out of his hand towards the distance and a rip in the fabric of space opening up, connecting to another point. I felt something tingle on the back of my neck, a danger sense I had developed in the time with Scathack attempting to take my life if I was careless. A spear burst out of that little hole, the portal that connected to who knows where. Something shot right for me at a speed that was impressive. It didn't escape my notice. The feeling I got wasn't from the intense speed, no, it was from the presence of what was coming for me. Death. I felt death from this thing, it was antithetical to my existence. Something ingrained so deep into my very being. I brought up Mirage to block, my hand on the flat of my blade as the tip of a spear collided with it. I put my full strength behind my weapon, feet digging into the ground, and I felt myself get pushed back before finally stopping. I looked up, George was gone, and I saw a face in the distance, the one who attacked me, and his spear, extended several hundred feet as it retracted back into the portal. My eyes narrowed as we shared one last look, and I mouthed a few words to him. His eyes widened and I couldn't help but smile as he retreated with his companion. I let out a breath. I wasn't tired, nor was I even hurt in the slightest, but I was exhausted because I kept getting involved in all this crap that I didn't want to. Mirage returned to my ring and I looked down at the ground. He managed to push me back a couple steps. It was impressive. Draig, was that what I think it was? The true Longinus. He replied. Well, things are going to get more complicated, aren't they? Is it too much for me to just get some fucking time to relax? Assholes destroyed part of my lawn. I muttered, looking at where I was standing previously. The true Longinus. It had been on my mind for a couple days now. I had set up many bounded fields around my home. Frankly, I think it would take even me some effort to break them down by brute force. And that's about all I could ask. They wouldn't keep anyone out that could truly threaten my life, but they were basically there to buy me time in an emergency. The true Longinus. It left an impression on me. Fear? I don't know if I would call it fear. It felt more primal, something that literally was antithetical to my existence, to my very core of being. It was like facing my mortality straight on. Was I scared? I don't think so, but I was definitely wary. The Spear of Destiny, it was an odd weapon. Any other weapon that went through what it did would have been classified as evil or demonic. Yet, it stands at the pinnacle of holy weapons in this world, even eclipsing the Caliban that boasts superiority of their broken Excalibur. The spear personally crafted and meant to be the personal armament of the God of the Bible. How much divine blood did it drink? I don't think there is a pantheon still in existence that didn't donate their divine blood unto that weapon's spear tip. After wounding or killing divine beings all over the planet, it became something evil, something desiring more blood. It was through this that it developed its anti-divine properties. It has the abilities to push through divinity like it was non-existent to truly wound divine beings. It was not a weapon fitting one who sat upon the heavenly throne, regardless of how powerful it was. So the God of the Bible is perhaps the most obvious thing to rectify it, yet also the most ridiculous. He impaled himself upon his own spear. The spear thirsted for blood, divine blood, so why not give his own? His holy attribute was devoured and turned the spear into something more neutral, perhaps even bordering holy. But that was it, the amount of divine blood it drank from other pantheons was only stalemated by his own holiness added on. And again, it was turned into a proper weapon, but he still didn't take it back as his own. It was the first sacred gear, the test, so to speak. He sent it off to the mortal world and centuries passed before someone managed to awaken it. This story was much more known. The man whose name was lost to history, was the spear named after him or was he named after the spear? He who impaled Christ upon the cross. Saint Longinus. Hell, other sacred gears use the name Longinus to correlate to their god-killing ability. That just went to show how absurd the spear actually was when used against divine beings. Possessing no divinity, yet still retaining all the holiness of the Heavenly Father, the Son of God. Cleansed, amplified, and sanctified. The ritual that Jesus, King of the Jews, actualized upon his suffering, it changed the spear once again into its final form. It was supposed to be God sacrificing himself to relieve humanity of their sins, a grand ritual that spanned the entire world, powered by the sacrifice of a divine being. It would skew humanity in favor of good over evil, as humans naturally are neutral at birth. It was actually the reason that humans could naturally be born with the holy attribute from that point on. Was it planned? Honestly, I have no idea beyond just the cliff notes of what happened. I wouldn't put it past Big G to have planned that entire situation out. It would be killing multiple birds with a single stone. What a scary spear. I said to myself. Not just divine beings or devils, anything with a dark attribute was prey for the holy spear. There is a reason it's rated as the strongest sacred gear. Drake added, making me pause again. Oh, you're admitting defeat. I heard him snort in annoyance. I'm reliant on my partner, the spear. The spear can slay gods even with a novice if he gets lucky. I let out a small laugh. What a ridiculous weapon. He was exaggerating a little bit, perhaps it could kill those lesser divine beings, like mountain or river gods. Hell, it could probably even wound a real god to a certain extent, but take any Olympian and put them in the path of the spear with a novice at the back, and they're getting bitch slapped into the moon. But his point stands. Usually, divinity is almost like a barrier or wall that a mortal has trouble overcoming. It is a higher state of being, it naturally has advantages over those who are lesser. It's one of the reasons that if everything else is equal, two beings, one with divinity and the other without, the one with divinity would win in a fight hands down. It is one of the many reasons that mortal god slayers are so exalted throughout history. It isn't merely a matter of punching harder, though that can technically work. You need to overcome the natural state of a divine being existing above you, something that wields part of the world in their authority. Of course there are exceptions, devils for instance, they are counter to divine beings. Similar to other races in the world. The giants of Norse and Greek myths, they could slay gods because they are the opposite side of the coin, so to speak. OP, please nerf. I laughed, standing up from where I had been sitting on my porch. Perhaps, my blood was even boiling a little bit. The idea that the spear could take my life if it gets any meaningful hit on me. Gods, I think Skathack corrupted me. I wondered how Gibalg would match up to it in combat. The spear my teacher crafted, that demonic spear that erupts in bloodlust every time it's used versus the holy spear that has slain gods. Well, I guess both spears have slain gods before. It's no sword yet, I felt some desire to possess it, was it merely my greed acting up? Or maybe it was my nature as a devil that wanted to corrupt something holy. I mean, not really corrupt, but just add it to my growing collection. Honestly, I had no overarching issue with the Heaven faction. As long as I'm left alone, I'm not going to go seek out conflict with them for no reason. The same goes for destroying their images or idols. But hey, if some idiot wants to donate their spear to me, who am I to refuse? Mr. Wiggles was off playing somewhere, I could faintly feel him through our connection. Honestly, all I planned for today was to train him. Indeed, I will make him the fiercest rabbit this world has ever seen. Ding. I blinked, pulling out my phone from my pocket. Hello, this is Izzy, I don't know if you remember me, Izzy. I stared at it for a moment before replying. Of course I remember you, have you heard back from your kids yet? Wilhelm. Yes, I must thank you, your advice has worked well. My youngest had responded and he said he would visit me next month. Izzy. Ah, I'm glad when things work out. I think I needed some good news like this, even if it doesn't really affect me. I'm happy for you. Wilhelm. Thank you, I was wondering if you wished to meet up again tonight, I enjoyed the place last time. Izzy. I mulled it over, perhaps I've been feeling more stressed than I need to. I mean, I just came back to this world to essentially relax and I keep getting roped into conflicts. Fuck it, any reason to escape my dreary thoughts is good enough for me. That would be lovely. Wilhelm. Yes, I look forward to seeing you again. Izzy. See you then, smiley face Wilhelm. Having friends is nice. Oh. I can show off the stage magic I've been learning. Sir. Wiggles. I shouted, and almost immediately I felt him bolt back towards me. Damn, he's fast. Well, what I should expect from a supernatural rabbit. I wonder what magics I should teach him. Maybe start off with elemental manipulation. He should be closer to nature, so perhaps that would be the best place to start. I admit, seeing him flinging fireballs around would be most amusing. Or perhaps freezing entire areas with vast arrays of ice magic. Then that would be difficult for him to move. Lightning is also an option, but then again, I use lightning a lot too, shouldn't I teach him something to supplement me? Some druidism may work as well, it was where I derived the initial concepts for my Bindings of Gaia spell. Hey there, buddy. I held out my arms as he jumped right into them. You have fun. Images of him exploring the property and surroundings came through our link. He went pretty far out and even found someone to give him a carrot and he was being smug about it. Aren't carrots technically bad for rabbits? Well, maybe him being a magic rabbit means that doesn't matter. I'm not his mother, he should know what he can and cannot eat. Ready to go meet my friend? We'll show her what we've been practicing. I did share my thoughts with him, I wouldn't just shove him in my hat and force him to perform with me. Who knew the little fluffball had dreams of grandeur? Granted, he didn't exactly tell me that, more so sending feelings and impressions. Having a connection like this was odd. If I focused, I could feel what he was feeling basically through images, and somehow that would translate into something I could understand. I just shook my head. What an amusing familiar I picked up. I still need to create costumes for the future, especially one for Sir Wiggles, matching hat of course. Pulling a rabbit out of my hat, while he wears a hat. Maybe even a little sweet and vest too. Well, this would be a good distraction. I need to stop stressing while on my little vacation. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.